Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Daily Word. We've reached the end of another week. Today is Friday, November 12th. Glad you could join me. It's a beautiful sunny morning after yesterday's wind and rain and whatever that was going on yesterday. It's a beautiful morning this morning. I guess it's the calm before the cold. It's going to be cold this weekend. So I guess, it is the middle of November, so we should be prepared for that. So I went to therapy this morning. Good news, I finally got my range of motion to 115 degrees today. 120 is where they really want you to be. And I got 115 today, which after all this time, we are finally making progress. So there might be some light at the end of the tunnel for me when it comes to going to therapy a lot. So anyways, that's good news to share. Hopefully you'll join us Sunday morning for worship. We'll be here in the church, in the sanctuary. Sunday morning is Noisy Bucket offering, so you can bring your change and drop in the Noisy Bucket. That change helps us to carry out local missions specifically, and we have many of those coming up during the season of Thanksgiving and Advent and Christmas. So if you could help us with an extra gift in that Noisy Bucket. You can even put cash in there. You could even write a check and put in there if you want to help us carry out local missions that are really significant this time of year. So thanks for that. If you can't join us Facebook Live, and we'll be glad to have you with us as we share and worship together on Sunday morning. So the scripture I've chosen for this morning comes to us from the book of Genesis. So this is the story of Joseph. So we know that Joseph was betrayed by his brothers. And the big long story of Joseph and the coat of many colors, and Joseph then saving his family from famine. Joseph could have chosen to be bitter, to be angry at his brothers, and rightfully so. If Joseph would have chosen this other path of anger and bitterness and, not wanting to forgive, I think we would probably understand, they threw him in a hole, for goodness sake. They left him for dead. But he chose to react to them differently. So in the conversation, when Joseph's brothers recognize him and they're afraid of his reaction, this is just one sentence of his words to them. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done. So, whether we like it or not, or realize it or not, or appreciate it or not, we always choose a perspective. We always choose how we're going to react to certain things. And you know that when we choose a perspective, it's like knocking down the first domino in a long row of dominoes. When we choose a perspective, it then leads to more decisions that follow the effect of the same line of perception. And so in all of our lives, we perceive lots of things that are either happening or probably not happening. Sometimes, our imaginations can go wild. Sometimes we're just not sure, what it is that God's calling us to. Sometimes we overthink things, but perception is a big part of who we are. In Genesis chapter 50, Joseph has chosen this perspective. And his perspective is to understand, forgive, and then influence the lives of his brothers by acknowledging the deep truth of his story. Now, his brothers had decided to try to kill him out of jealousy. Of course, they relented and they sold him. Joseph recognized that in reality, their intent was to harm him. But Joseph has chosen to see that God has somehow miraculously used this evil to save the family. And so Joseph chooses grace towards his brothers. You know, I was thinking about this morning. On my way to therapy. I like to go really early in the morning. I'm the first patient. I was the only patient there for a while. Well, I guess there was one other person, but I got to thinking about the stories that we share. I started going to therapy at this particular place where I go for 2 years now. I've been going for 2 years. And it's not been easy. It's been my knee. It's been my hip. It's been my knee. It's been my back. And while I don't perceive these surgeries as a good thing, I perceive my many relationships with the people, the therapist, all those ladies who work there, as a byproduct of my life. And my perspective, while therapy is tough, and I never really hated it, mind you, the perspective I've chosen is to know that while this is hard, my relationship now with these people who I go to therapy with is a long relationship that will last long beyond the time that I walk away from there. Our perspective, and how we treat each other, I like that idea that it's the first domino in this long line of dominoes that then affects not just me and you, but all kinds of people. Too often, our perception is something that just happens to us. And we choose a perspective without even knowing it. And then sometimes that causes a false reality, right? And then we can't distinguish between right and wrong, false and truth. We then are quick to blame, and then we justify our anger, and then we defend our feelings, and then we're quick to blame, and we justify our anger, and we defend our feeling. And what's often lost in the midst of this is that we're really making choices. Now, Joseph, he had a choice to make. He could be angry. He could know that, and he did know, the harm that was intended was evil, and he had the power to react and do away with his brothers, if you will. But Joseph chose the perspective that the harm that was intended actually could turn out to be good. Joseph saved his family. He saved his family, brought them from a place of famine and saved them and embraced them and kissed them on the neck. I mean, Joseph chose this perspective. And I think for us, if we choose to live the kind of lives that are intentional and purpose-filled, then I think we have to be aware of the perception that's all around us. And not just for ourselves, but for those close to us, and then those a little farther away, and then for the world at large. We have to choose a perspective of what God intends for us. Joseph, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. I needed that UPS package really badly. So, for us, we just choose this perspective of how we're going to react with each other. Then how our lives are going to affect the lives of others. I just think it's so critical in how we're living our lives now, in the midst of all the things going on, how important to know that God, through you and through me, even the toughest of situations. So, this surgery stuff has been hard. This therapy stuff has been hard. And we cheered today at my progress. And what was hard has turned out to be relationships that affect my life in a good way. And I believe that my life has affected their lives in a good way. And you see how that works, that domino that falls? Now, we can choose the opposite in all of our lives. We can choose to be angry. We can choose to just be hateful. We can choose to hate all kinds of things around us. But the domino that falls is a domino of hate and anger and whatever it is. Or we can choose Joseph's perspective of forgiveness and understanding and knowing that that kind of domino that falls then makes a difference in the lives around us. I believe it to be true. It's not pie in the sky stuff. I believe it to be true. I've witnessed it in my life, and I know you've all witnessed it in your lives as well. So, Joseph, you intended to harm me, he said, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done. Goodness, thanks be to God for the domino that falls when we choose the proper perspective to love and forgive and be present in each other's lives. If enough dominoes fall, then the world can change. I believe it can. And we can make the world just a much better place. So I hope that's a good word for you, as it is for me, as I try to look at my life. So enjoy the weekend. Join us Sunday morning for worship at 10:15. Know of God's love. Know of the love of dominoes of love that fall when you choose to love. Know of my love for all of you, that hopefully has been a good domino that falls in your life. And I look forward to seeing you Sunday morning at 10:15 and again Monday morning at 10 o'clock. Have a great day and a great weekend, my friends.